Can startups turn Dominican Republic into the Japan of the Caribbean? The answer is yes. Listen, I'm Jonathan Mentor. I'm a revenue scientist and I turn startups into $10 million annual recurring revenue machines. And I'm here to talk about how Dominican Republic is going to turn into the Japan of the Caribbean. No, this is not a rhetorical question. Dominican Republic can turn into the Japan of the Caribbean. There's a really interesting lesson that history can teach us, and it's about the Japanese and Russian War back in the early 1900s. Look, Japan was a feudal society. They were walking around with horse and buggies, samurais with their swords walking around in the streets. Meanwhile, Russia was this huge industrialized modern nation. In about 150 years, Japan industrialized with such force and such velocity that it was able to defeat, was the first Asian country to defeat a major world power in modern times. Think about what that looks like in terms of where Dominican Republic is in terms of its economic and political growth in congruence to the rest of the world. Dominican Republic has all of the ingredients: political stability, economic growth, a strong and growing middle class, a growing, although not perfect, education system. All of the ingredients are there. Dominican Republic will indeed be the Japan of the Caribbean, and it's going to start with technology, small businesses, and innovation. Why the Dominican Republic? Why not the Bahamas? Why not Jamaica? Look, the Dominican Republic has three really strong economic pillars as it stands today, as of the time of this recording in 2025. What I mean by economic pillars is they drive the economy in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in the Dominican economy. That's real estate, which geniusly the Dominican Republic has developed its entire infrastructure based on real estate because it's a very business-friendly environment. So instead of saying, hey, look, we're going to raise taxes and we're going to spend government dollars on building real estate, they said, no, we're going to create a really friendly business environment. We're going to attract foreign investors that are interested in real estate. And as they develop the real estate, tax revenues will grow as a result, incentives will grow as a result, and infrastructure will follow. Pillar number 2 is tourism. You have lots of hotel chains. Hotels create jobs, although not the best, highest wage earning jobs, but they create jobs. And for an economy that was considered third world not many years ago, having a job, even if it's not a high wage earning job, is better than nothing. It's really helping to lift people out of poverty. And number 3, it is technology and innovation. Dominican Republic is leading the region in terms of innovation, building technology infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, energy resilience, sustainability, recycling, you name it. Did you know Dominican Republic, we're sitting here, we have some of the finest mass transit in all of the Caribbean and all of Latin America, honestly. One of the only subway systems in Latin America. Just think about what the implications are in terms of the stage that we're setting for economic growth. Dominican Republic is on its way to being a first world country by 2050, and this has been a trend that has been steady for the past 4 decades. Let's start with what really matters. One of the things that the Dominican Republic has an opportunity to improve is separating, in terms of policy and culture, the difference between a small business and a startup. Let's think about what that means. A startup is a scalable technology, very low in assets, very high in IP or intellectual property. It's typically venture backed and backed by capital that's based on equity. Now, a small business at volume, they also do many of the same things startups do. They create jobs, they add to infrastructure, but they are typically based on bank loans and capital based on debt. Both of these things matter because while startups are scalable, and you only really need one startup, you only need one Apple, one Amazon, one Dominican startup or technology firm to scale and transform the economy, versus you're going to need hundreds and thousands of little nail salons or barber shops or colmados in order to represent an economic pillar within small businesses. So when you think about the importance of technology and innovation within startups and small businesses, both matter for very different reasons, and they affect and touch upon 5 different sectors of any government or society. And we're going to go over that right now. Let's get into it. Okay, these are the 5 elements that a strong startup ecosystem needs. I'm going to go over them really quickly, and then I'm going to tell you why they matter. It's entrepreneurs, a strong financial sector, a strong corporate sector, a strong government, and strong universities. How do they interplay? Well, You need entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs are the ones who drive innovation. They are the dreamers. They have the vision. They see things that we're thinking about now, but they already see things completed in 10 years. We need those dreamers and those creative strategists to build the kind of businesses that are going to change the face of the economy. The financial sector. There are two primary financial products in the world of business, and they're based on two very different things: equity-based funding and debt-based funding. And then we can argue, because I'm not a financial expert, I am a revenue scientist. But to simplify things, if you base financing, or if you base the capital that you're deploying based on debt, you're going to be a bank. You're going to primarily base it on a whole bunch of loans. You're going to have a strong mortgage sector. You're going to have a strong auto loan sector, things that the middle class are going to buy, leverage debt, and then use in their everyday life. You want to scale that, and most economies in the world understand what that means. But equity-based financing, things like private equity, venture capital, and seed capital, which is required for startup and innovation and technology growth, because the runway is much longer for you to do things like break even, generate revenue, generate profit. You need to have both. And although the central banking system in Dominican Republic is strong, there's still not a really strong equity-based capital products portfolio. There's not a lot of people deploying capital that's backed by equity. Number 3 are corporations. Corporations have a ton of capital, infrastructure to get products done, and they have a lot of influence leading their different sectors. If we take a page out of the book of Silicon Valley and a lot of American or even Asian corporations, if you're leading a sector like Arajet does in the Dominican Republic, they have the responsibility to develop aviation technology, and they don't need to because they're an airline. But what they can create are different investment goals or investment pockets to deploy capital, equity-based capital, alongside banks, alongside other organizations to develop the aviation sector. That's just an example. Same thing that Google does in the United States. Google is a search engine. They're into big data. They have several innovation sectors across their vertical where their employees or other people can come in and say, hey, you lead this sector. This is the way that we can innovate, invest in my projects. The next one is government. Tax incentives, programs, training, ease of access, ease of doing business, all of the things that the government can create to incentivize, create visibility, and create the perfect conditions for entrepreneurs, startups, and innovations to thrive in. And the last one is universities. You're going to need talent, you're going to need research, you're going to need data, you're going to need thinkers, you're going to need people to challenge and create intellectual tension, because although entrepreneurs can dream, they need to be grounded in strong operations. So the 5 specific elements that create a strong startup ecosystem that still doesn't quite exist in Dominican Republic, although they're doing a great job of getting it off the ground, are your entrepreneurial element, your financial sector element, your corporate element, your government element, and your university element. I compliment corporations in the Dominican Republic all the time, but I'm also not afraid to pick a fight. And one of the biggest things that the Dominican Republic and the Dominican entrepreneurial class hasn't really created are called innovation labs. And what this means for national growth, and the implications are huge if you take a look at any other developed nation in the world, because when the private sector leads innovation, the government will typically follow and make conditions even greater depending on the results of those specific innovations. So in Dominican Republic, for example, you have the big banks. You have your Banco Reserva, BHD, you have Banco Popular. They can create innovation centers, and they have, because there are 2 big accelerators. They can be doing more in terms of deploying equity-based capital for startup growth and seed capital. What are some other big industries? You look at Grupo Punta Cana. Grupo Punta Cana is they're a huge corporation in terms of developing tourism and construction. They should be looking at different innovative ways to get their own projects done. In turn, giving opportunity to smaller vendors and startups to play in the big leagues, forwarding their own interests as a corporation, and contributing to national infrastructure. And again, one of my favorite examples is Arajet. Arajet's currently one of the darlings of the Dominican government and the Dominican Republic in general. They should be leading different initiatives in the tourism and the aviation sector. And although not everything is a priority for big companies like Arajet, it should certainly represent an opportunity where they can start leading innovation centers instead of just kind of like getting everything to themselves, because that's kind of called a monopoly, and that's never good for a developing economy. Now let's talk about the government. I'm not a big fan of the government funding, like writing checks to entrepreneurs for startup. That's not going to work. That's bordering on kind of like communism and socialism. That doesn't really incentivize innovation. It incentivizes people to pitch to the government to get their money. That's a whole nother rabbit hole that I'm not going to go into. But leading private and public partnerships and procurement programs specifically is really the golden ticket. For example, in the United States and other governments around the world, there are public procurement portals, right? If the government needs to get something done, they'll do what's called an RFP, a request for proposal, and they'll put that out into the public, and they'll do a big press release about it. And let's be fair, in real life terms, it's usually going to be the bigger players that they already know that are going to get those projects. And I actually made another video about this with Cabo Rojo and the way that Grupo Punta Cana is leading the Cabo Rojo project. But one of the things that the Dominican government can do, like yesterday, is put up a procurement portal. Hey, these are the national goals. These are all of our departments. These are the things that we're going into. Here are the current vendors. Here's what we need. Come and play ball. At the very least, it gives visibility to the entrepreneurial class, and at least the entrepreneurial class, maybe they don't win every pitch, maybe they don't get every job, but then they have visibility into, okay, why is it that they picked Grupo Punta Cana to lead this project? Why is it that they chose the Bicinis to lead this other project? Why is it that this university got to run this specific show or initiative and not these smaller businesses? It's not about creating hostility. It's not about creating resentment. It's about creating transparency between the government, what the government's trying to get done, and giving opportunities to entrepreneurs so at least they can put their best foot forward and throw their hat in the ringer. This creates national competition and incredible incentives for entrepreneurs to get creative, strategic, and concrete about how they're approaching different government programs. Yo, and nobody's perfect. I'm not saying that the Dominican government and the Dominican entrepreneurial class need to do it on their own. There are several things that are going to get in the way on a cultural level. Don't get me started on nepotism in Dominican Republic. Don't get me started on classism in the Dominican Republic. Don't let me talk about the old boys club, because these things exist and the consequences are really profound. And I can do a whole video on that. But honestly, if we zoom out, one of the best ways that Dominican society and the Dominican startup and business sector can drive the economy is collaborating internationally. Right? There should be no fear of being outdone. There should be no intimidation from, okay, this guy's not from here. He doesn't understand the way things are done here in the Dominican Republic. He comes with all these ideas. I've definitely run into that kind of resistance when I'm trying to do business here in Dominican Republic. I found my ways around it because I'm Jonathan Mentor. But things like getting mentorship matters. Mentorship specifically in the context of startup acceleration and incubation. Listen, you can be this really huge corporate leader, right? But you might be very far removed from what it takes to start a business or start a startup or get from the ground floor to your first customer or from your first customer to your first 1,000 customers. Operating at that level requires the kind of mentorship that just isn't available in the Dominican Republic. I'm available if anybody's listening, but more importantly, it's about getting people who can mentor these startups, these entrepreneurs, and these small businesses that have experience, like relevant experience on that ground level. Because running a business and growing a business and starting a business, these are three different skill sets that need to be developed by three very different kinds of mentors. Talent importation, that's another thing. Let us break the chain, the cycle of nepotism and, yo, my primo, and, I know this guy and that guy is doing this and my son's, those aren't the best people for the job. Those are the best people you can control. Those are the best people that you're familiar with. But opening up the talent pool to international talent and welcoming those from abroad into the Dominican Republic to consult on or be a part of project. It doesn't take the glory away from the Dominican Republic. It doesn't take the glory away from the big corporations here. You're still going to run the show. You're still the quarterback on the play, but you need the best players in the game. And sometimes that talent just does not exist in the Dominican Republic. So we should really open the doors and be more inclusive. Also, the globalization piece. Sometimes what I have seen, many times what I've seen from entrepreneurs here is they kind of live in this bubble that's very insular, right? So they see the resources that are available to them right here, and they don't see anything outside of Dominican Republic. And that applies to startup founders, startup players and actors in the ecosystem, as well as the big corporations that can help the smaller startups get exposure here in the Dominican Republic. There needs to be a more global perspective, right? If you can't get the funding here in Dominican Republic, go to Puerto Rico. If you can't get it in Puerto Rico, go to Mexico. You can't get it in Mexico, go to Spain. But there's absolutely no reason with the access to internet and with all of the information available that Dominican startups can't reach out. Same thing for those startups in the US and the Dominican diaspora that want to do business in the Dominican Republic. It can seem intimidating because you have to navigate all of these systems. Creating that transparency between who's in control, who has the span of control, the influence, who can keep the gates on the doors, and opening that up with welcoming eyes and arms, open ears, and a grand vision to include those kind of people. That's really going to help to drive the innovation moving forward instead of concentrating power within a small group of people. So if you're in Dominican Republic or you're Dominican and you live outside the Dominican Republic, or if you just love Dominican Republic and Dominican people and you have a startup that you think can help in an emerging market, let me know. I'm here to do my best to connect you to the right people based on my track record here in Dominican Republic with the relationships that I have. You can look me up on my website and see the kind of people that I've been working with, not only here in the Dominican Republic, but across the world in the startup sector. If you have that idea, or you're hitting a wall, or you're having trouble navigating the startup ecosystem, I'm here to help. You don't need me to help. I'm sure you could do it without me, baby. Good luck. But it helps to have somebody on the ground. I'm here. I'm going to leave my website right down below. There's going to be a contact form there if you want to reach out. There's no strings attached. I'm not here to sell. I'm here to support, and I'm here to help grow startups in the Dominican Republic.